Everybody knows that the only reason to watch M. Night Shyamalan movies anymore outside of masochism is because of the nostalgia over how much the twists in his 3 good movies got you back in the day. With that in mind, please allow the magic of spoilers to help remove any lingering obligation you might feel to see this one. They're not the kids' real grandparents, they're a pair of escaped mental patients with a hang-up about kids posing as the grandparents. Holy piss-slathered, crusted-over crap on a crutch has 2016 offered up an embarrassment of contenders for the title of Year's Worst Movie, and now with The Visit, reigning Year's Worst champion M. Night Shyamalan has, like a late 90s Hulk Hogan, realizing someone else might have a more memorable angle right at the moment, muscled his way to the front and declared, "You think you know shit movies? I'll show you a shit movie." In fact, since I've already done you the courtesy of spoiling the twist, allow me to now also spoil the one reason people will be talking about this latest eyeball molestation from the last shitbender. The film takes great, elaborately telegraphed pains to remind us that one of our heroes has a paralyzing phobia of germs, while one of our villains wears adult diapers because of chronic incontinence. During the climactic showdown, and folks, I am not making a word of this up, said bad guy removes his used diaper, monologues for a bit, and then shoves the business end of his mess into the kid's face. Just so we're clear, this isn't a tension-relieving scatological gag or a moment of offbeat weirdness. The Visit has been methodically building up to this scene. This is meant to be the scene of this movie. The Visit's equivalent to Jaws emerging from behind Brody or the chestburster popping out in Alien. It feels every bit like Shyamalan trying and failing to ape the gag reflex horror of an Eli Roth movie, but it lands with a thud as the shame of Pennsylvania here finally achieves the perfect metaphor for the state of his career across the last 6 to 7 miserable films, smushing a pile of shit into the audience's face and declaring it a cinematic tour de force. This is cliche enough to be in one of his movies at this point, but I've gotta say it. Is there any universe where M. Night Shyamalan is not the biggest disappointment in the history of post-1970s American film? Seriously, once upon a time, the Indian-American answer to Irva Bull here hit 3 home runs in a row and had serious-minded people actually calling him the next Spielberg, and then with his very next project, he set off on a path of film after film that would have easily qualified as a career-ending celluloid aneurysm from anyone else in the business. His continuing existence as an employable filmmaker, though, to be fair, at least this one is an appropriately budgeted $5 million cheapie for the Blumhouse people, feels like Hollywood buying carbon offset credits for amoral indifference. Yeah, sure, we're a bunch of greedy, decadent, narcissistic bottom feeders, but hey, we're not all bad. Look, we've been voluntarily keeping this drooling has-been off government assistance for like 13 years. But you know what? At least up to this point, he'd been an interesting failure. He was making horrible films, but at least he was doing so while trying to grow as a filmmaker. Experimenting with different genres, different narrative techniques, different styles. That's the right kind of experimenting. Hell, that's the second best version of the word experimenting. But with The Visit, we find Shyamalan ready to crawl back to the Sixth Sense well. So here we are with another low-budget atmospheric thriller about precocious moppets navigating a protracted Twilight Zone episode wherein the most staggeringly obvious explanation for the mystery of what the fuck is going wrong is exactly what's going on. But back in 1999, the hook was that the Living Letdown's directing and storytelling skills were so on point that the red herring main storylines distracted you from putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that this super conventional campfire story was going to end exactly like a super conventional campfire story. This time around, we've got a rural, kid-centric takeoff on Bluebeard that actually reads like something the Midnight Society might have conjured from the smoke. 2 kids head off to spend the weekend at the isolated farmhouse of the grandparents they've never met or even seen, owing to the unnamed unpleasant circumstances regarding their mother's departure. They seem like a sweet old couple, but also exhibit strange behaviors that at first seem to be common psychological quirks of senior citizens, but then grow increasingly erratic to the point that it's clear that something is afoot and the kids are trapped with 2 extremely dangerous people. Unfortunately, we can now see that it wasn't just stretching beyond his comfort zone that led to M. Night's fall from grace years ago. He really has pissed away every droplet of talent he ever apparently possessed. This is not a bad setup for a thriller. The basic idea of adding a one step farther into horror layer to the common experience of being a child staying with a familiar, but not that familiar relative and being weirded out by their quirks or the environment is a solid pitch that the Shyamalan of The Sixth Sense should have knocked out of the park. But all the necessarily filmmaking 101 techniques that could have turned The Visit into at least a passable Goosebumps episode elude him here, completely. The plot mechanics required to make sure that no one can possibly identify the imposters either firsthand or by evidence is so obvious and convoluted you can't help but notice it and immediately figure out the twist and negate all tension pretty much within 10 minutes. The need to build to this twist by downplaying the villains robs them of even a remote level of menace. There's never any question that our monsters could be beaten to death by an 11-year-old, so when that's exactly what happens, it's devoid of any real impact. Oh, and on top of all that, it's a fucking found footage movie, in case you were thinking your hypothetical viewing experience was missing the prospect of a needle through the other testicle. Yeah, that's supposed to be the big no, look over here, twist-protecting diversion to this one. The older sister is a wannabe filmmaker documenting her week, allowing characters to talk directly to the camera, monologue about the big themes of guilt, loss, and familial abandonment, and allowing Shyamalan to hang lampshades all over the place about mise-en-scene, denouement, pacing, and use of music to excuse all of his techniques from being as blunt and obvious as possible. And none none of it fucking works. Even outside of the twist, there's nothing happening here worth watching. Only one of the cheap jump scares hits, barely. The kids are insufferable, and he can't even make the familiar horror of common situation stuff work. All the potentially interesting psychological thriller stuff you could do about misunderstood human behavior or unfamiliar environments gets tossed aside in favor of exaggerating someone's broad list of weird, gross stuff about old people, into horror movie cliches. Seriously, this might be the most anti-older person movie ever made, propping up tired senior stereotypes repurposed as horror iconography to the point that it feels like out-and-out bigotry, like The Visit approaches old people the way Birth of a Nation approached black people. Seriously, AARP should totally protest this movie, and if they do, I'll march with them. And not just because I also happen to enjoy early affordable breakfast that will no doubt cap off our morning. Not that the younger characters make out any better. Did I mention the boy is an aspiring white rapper? Yeah, because that's a thing that happens in a movie from 2015. An obnoxious little fuckwit white boy keeps rapping, badly, directly to the goddamn camera. It's supposed to be endearing. It's his whole character. He even does it over the end credits, as though Shyamalan is so resentful of his own audience that he wants them to trample each other to death, trying to escape when the house lights come up. And that's the thing. I was all set to wrap this up by waxing rhapsodic about how every single thing Shyamalan has made since The Village has been so hatefully bad that we almost need a new metric to measure his output by. Otherwise, whereas, say, The Happening might have been a federal crime for any other filmmaker, compared to Lady in the Water, it looks merely average. Picking a worst Shyamalan movie is like your doctor asking which jagged-edged bowel obstruction you'd like him to remove last. But the sheer spasmic vomit-inducing toxicity of his latest crystallizes a more pressing realization. As much as critics and audiences have come to hate him, Shyamalan hates them more. And The Visit is nothing less than an act of violence visited upon the audience. As it turns out, M. Night is not unaware of the irony of making a diaper to the face the signature money shot of the movie. This is a failed, flailing has-been of a filmmaker in full-on attack mode, and everything from the stupid plotting, to the deathly dull pacing, to the moronic plot mechanics, to the shitty found footage motif, to the aggressively awful script, to the nasty and the wrong way child endangerment shock value bullshit, and the finale are nothing less than symbolic fistfuls of shit to the faces of audiences that have rejected him, the critics who've castigated him, and the industry that may finally have stopped calling him. But here's the thing, Knight, you aren't the class of '99 wunderkind who jumped ahead into some visionary next-level filmmaking that Michael Bay's America just wasn't ready to follow you to. That was the Wachowskis. You made The Village. You made The Happening. You made The Last Airbender. You made Devil. You made After Earth. You made Lady in the fucking Water, which featured a film critic-eating monster and starred yourself as a misunderstood super genius writer whose work will one day save the world. And now you made this. You made all that shit, you brought all this scorn down on yourself. And the movies didn't go over anyone's head, nobody misunderstood anything, no critic turned up their nose as you boldly subverted narrative convention. You, as it turned out, aren't really that interesting. All the garbage you've been farting out for the last decade and change has been safe, soft, middle-brow popcorn pablum, and you couldn't even do that right. You did this to yourself, and you got only yourself to blame. What a twist. Now how about you take your metaphorical shit-filled diaper of a movie and shove it in your own face?